I made some comments that people might have felt were misleading. And, to anybody who felt misled by those comments, I take full responsibility for those comments.
Aaron Rodgers speaking today, but he didn't backtrack about what he said on the Pat McAfee show last week on why he didn't get vaccinated. This is the lines of fact and fiction about vaccines continue to blur. Joining us live, Dr. Jeff Pothof, UW Health's Chief Quality Officer. Doctor, great to see you. Aaron Rodgers, let's be honest, he speaks for a lot of people who have chosen not to get a COVID shot, who want to do what's best for them and their family. But missing in his online interviews is a health professional. And Rodgers raised a lot of questions last week. We'd love to get your thoughts. I mean, here he is last week doubting the vaccine.
If the vaccine is so great, then how come people are still getting COVID and spreading COVID and unfortunately dying from COVID? Like, if the vaccine is so safe, then how come the manufacturers of the vaccine have full immunity? So let's just step back and realize, like, this vaccine is revolutionary, the things that they're doing. However, we don't know a whole lot about it. And to just say that it's a blanket for all that ails you, in my opinion, is wrong and reckless.
Okay, doctor, is he right that we don't know a lot about the vaccines?
I'd have to disagree with Aaron Rodgers here. We had those phase 3 clinical trials, and at that point we had, 40-some thousand folks who have gotten the dose, and they were safe, they were effective, but now the proof is in the pudding. These vaccines have been given over 1 billion times around the world. We have remarkable safety data on them. We have remarkable data on how effective they are in preventing COVID. No vaccine is 100% effective. I don't think it's fair to say because anyone who got vaccinated ever came down with COVID that the vaccines are no good. But the track record of these vaccines is excellent. They're safe and they're effective, and they do make a huge difference in the pandemic. And we see that in areas that are highly vaccinated versus those who are not.
Rodgers says natural immunity has not been part of the conversation. Here's what he had to say about that.
I consulted with a now good friend of mine, Joe Rogan, after he got COVID, and I've been doing a lot of the stuff that he recommended in his podcasts and, on the phone to me. And I'm going to have the best immunity possible now based on the 2.5 million person study from Israel that people who get COVID and recover have the most robust immunity.
I'm going to take Joe Rogan out of this because that's its own controversy. But the point he makes that natural immunity and recovering is better than those who are vaccinated, according to a study out of Israel. Your thoughts?
I think this natural immunity versus vaccine-induced immunity is something that we hear from a lot of folks. And it's true, when the Israel study hit Instagram, it was an instant success. I think there are some limitations of that Israel study. One, it wasn't peer-reviewed, and all of us have implicit biases. We can develop studies that may not account for certain things that we want other experts to look at. And that study didn't have that scrutiny. Now, what experts have said is that Israeli study looked at folks who were vaccinated and then got infected more than 6 months later, which we now know is when some of our vaccines start to lose their protection. You can get breakthrough cases. That's why we have boosters. There's also some questions about that study and whether those individuals who had a previous infection with COVID-19 would voluntarily go and get tested if they developed mild symptoms. So there's some thoughts around the methodological problems with that study around who actually got tested and could those who had natural immunity actually made up a bigger group. There's another study, the CDC has a study that looks at natural versus vaccine-induced immunity, found that it was 5 times more likely that folks who had natural immunity might get reinfected, but likewise was in hospitalized patients. So that may not accurately reflect the population in general. Another study out of Kentucky that found that folks that were leaning on natural immunity 2.3 times more likely to get reinfected. So I don't think that this question is definitively answered, but our best data so far suggests that vaccine-induced immunity is better than natural immunity. And the last point to make is natural immunity comes at a cost. 750,000 people may have tried that theory or tried that and they're not going to be with us for the holiday. So it's dangerous to say, hey, I'm just going to get COVID and have natural immunity. A lot of people, that didn't work out so well.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that. I mean, a lot of people have gotten sick and have died. They're not around to really find out if that's true or not. I want to ask you about ivermectin, because that has become a big topic of conversation. Here's Rodgers.
We've given away billions of dollars to these pharmaceutical companies now for these vaccines, and it's not going to stop. Merck's coming out with a pill. Pfizer's coming out with a pill that's going to help. It's basically the expensive versions of ivermectin. Why do people hate ivermectin? Not just because Trump championed it, because it's a cheap generic. Can't make any money off it. But it's been used 1 billion times in India. Go look at that research. What's going on over there?
He's not wrong. A lot of people around the world have taken ivermectin, right?
Absolutely, and I wish ivermectin was effective in treating COVID. That would be a really great thing. Similar to some of that research that's out there on natural immunity versus vaccine-induced immunity, there is a fair bit of research out there on ivermectin, whether it works, whether it doesn't. And when you look at all of those studies, some of them being retracted for methodological flaws, not peer-reviewed, the overwhelming evidence suggests that, unfortunately, ivermectin is not effective. It's not going to help you in combating COVID-19. As a healthcare professional, I want medicines to be accessible to all my patients. And if there was a cheap medicine that was effective against COVID, I guarantee you the country's doctors would be clamoring around that. I agree, medications are too expensive, but this isn't an issue of whether we like Trump or not, or whether or not we want medications to be expensive. We want to turn people towards therapies that are actually effective, not have them think they're doing something that's going to help them when in fact it's not.
Okay, here's the last comment I want to play from you from Rodgers in that interview.
I'm the second non-vax player to test positive. It's pretty evident I tested positive being around a vaccinated individual. I mean, that's the majority of people I spend time with. There's been dozens of individuals that work at the facility that are vaxxed that have tested positive. So this idea that it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated is just a total lie.
That is a total lie. That was what Aaron Rodgers said. Your thoughts?
I think there's a large proportion of the population that has this binary view of vaccination, i.e., if you're vaccinated, there should be zero chance that you could have a breakthrough case. And if there's any chance, the vaccines aren't effective. But, let's look at the data. The most recent data suggests that if you're vaccinated, you are 6 times less likely to come down with COVID-19. If we look at intensive care admissions to a hospital, if you're unvaccinated, you're 12 times more likely to end up in the ICU. So here's a scenario. You walk into a 13-bed intensive care unit that treats COVID patients. 1 of those patients is vaccinated. 12 of those patients are vaccinated. Do you think that this is a pandemic of the vaccinated or the unvaccinated? The answer is right now, folks who are vaccinated are really well protected. Those who are unvaccinated make up the majority of the cases.
I know a lot of people have been watching these interviews. How do we get you and Aaron Rodgers in the same room? Because that is an interview I like to watch.
As long as we're not playing football, because I think he'd pretty much have me there. But if we want to talk science, I think I got a chance.
Dr. Pothof from UW Health, we had so many questions, very interesting comments. We appreciate your time.